Okay, welcome everyone. First, the Center and the SCA would like to thank Mr. Joe Shami for dedicating today's event in memory of his father, Louis, and in honor of his mother, Lorraine. Thank you, Joe, for your continued generosity and support always. This morning's event was made possible by Ricky Novick. Ricky's determination to bring top-level programming to our community has no limits. We at the Center, together with the SCA, are thrilled to bring you this conversation with Mr. Natan Sharansky and Mr. Gil. It is truly an honor to be able to introduce this Zoom featuring a genuine Jewish hero such as Mr. Sharansky. He is an icon. His story as a refusenik and political prisoner unified the entire international Jewish community in the common cause of freeing Soviet Jews. His career as a politician in Israel was similarly notable for the bridges he built and the moral way that he handled his many roles in the Israeli government. Mr. Sharansky received the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor in 1986, the U.S. Presidential Medal of Honor from George W. Bush in 2006. He was also the recipient of Israel's prestigious Genesis Prize this year, and he donated the $1 million prize money to organizations combating the coronavirus. Together with Mr. Gil, they have written Never Alone, the remarkable true story of his struggles and successes. It is a beautiful, powerful book that is riveting and eye-opening from the first to last page. As much as a story about the past, it also presents us with a roadmap for the future. Moderating this conversation is our own Mr. Ricky Cohen. Mr. Cohen is recognized as a leader in the Sephardic Jewish community in Brooklyn in particular, and in the New York philanthropic community in general. He has played a major role in the establishment and leadership of key organizations and schools, including Sephardic Bikor Cholim, Bar Yeshiva, the Council for the Rescue of Syrian Jewry, Children of Chernobyl, and particularly relevant to this morning's event, the Russian American Jewish Experience, which is the largest Jewish educational institution in the US. Ricky is a published author, business leader, and public speaker. We want to say thank you to Stephen Hiddery and the entire Center board and staff for making this event possible. Together, you are finding new and creative ways to bring the Center to us when we can't always go to the Center. We have 2 upcoming Zooms also featuring inspiring Israeli stories. Our next one will be a conversation with Mr. Abraham Cohen, brother of Eli Cohen, Israel's most famous spy. That will be held on December 20th. And a Zoom with Israeli female Orthodox world-class marathoner Bidi Deutsch coming up as well. So please look out for those details about those future events. A special thank you to Emily Anteby and Greta Schwartz for all you do behind the scenes. The chat will be monitored, so if there are any questions you, the audience, would like to ask, please write them in the chat, and if time allows, we will get to them. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Mr. Ricky Cohen.
Right. This is, thank you, Irene, Ricky, Emily, the Sephardic, the SCA, our own center, and all of you for joining. This is a very special day for our community to celebrate and share and grow from 2 of the contemporary giants of the Jewish community is rare. We read about people who have had an immeasurable impact on Jewish destiny, but we can rarely meet them and enjoy time with them and share insights directly with them. So we're deeply appreciative to all of the organizations who helped sponsor the event, to the leadership of Ricky Novick, Irene, and Emily for championing and pulling all the pieces together. Our goal today is to learn. My background is as a teacher, and the goal is to take this magnificent work of 450 pages written so beautifully, so eloquently. I believe, as I mentioned to Natan and Gil before we started, this book could become a curriculum on personal Jewish leadership, on community involvement, on risk-taking, on courage. What we'll do this morning, is attempt to cull as many ideas as we can so that we and our children and our fellow community members can take the insights from the lives of these outstanding men and incorporate them into our own lives and grow from them. With that in mind, I want to note a couple of things. My generation specifically was shaped immeasurably by the efforts of the students for the struggle for Soviet Jewry. The Triple SJ played a huge part in our high school experience, and putting aside the rallies and the demonstrations and those things which on some small level may have had an impact on all of what we're learning about and celebrating today, but no less important, they shaped us as people and implanted in us a permanent desire to build the Jewish community through activism that would go beyond our borders. The Council for the Rescue of Syrian Jewry, which came into being a couple of decades later, was unquestionably a result of the taste, of the understanding, of the success that we had a tiny part in as a result of the student struggle for Soviet Jewry. So I want to note that and recognize that. I also want to pay tribute today to our community members who had a role in going to the former Soviet Union to bring whatever they could, from it being a pair of tefillin, a Tehillim book, a letter, many of whom Natan writes about in his book, but I want to pay special tribute to Rabbi Raymond Harari, Rabbi Ezra Labaton, alav shalom, Mr. Sam Sutton, Mr. Morris Harari, Dr. Ricky Grazi, members of our own community who in those days had the courage to go into the former Soviet Union and meet with refuseniks and dissidents and help them grow their connection to Yahadut. I also want to make note of the educators beyond our community who were leaders in this and had a great impact on our lives as well, including but not limited to Rabbi Avi Weiss, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin, Rabbi Effie Buchwald. They also made trips to the former Soviet Union. They came back and they taught and they inspired, and we owe a lot to those men today. Finally, I want to mention RAGE, the Russian American Jewish Experience. It's a program, an educational program in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, that I've had the great good fortune to be affiliated with for the last handful of years, where I've met the finest young men and women you could ever meet. People whose grandparents were murdered by the Nazis, whose parents were put through some of the immeasurable suffering that Natan described in his book, The Communists. These young men and women come to learn and to grow and to reconnect to their Judaism with courage, with determination, and extraordinary brain power. So I want to note today the commitment of the young adults and the leadership and the educators of RAGE. Okay, the book, Never Alone. One of the most beautiful books I've read. I strongly recommend that each of you and your children and your students take the time to read it. It could be an entire curriculum, as I mentioned. The writing style is beautiful. It's written with humor, with soft-spokenness, with humility. It's an absolute pleasure and remarkably informative. Good. All righty, let's get started with the first question. In order, Natan, to get a sense and a context for everything we want to talk about today, if you wouldn't mind, please, if you can give us a background of the world you were born into and grew up in the former Soviet Union. With that context, we can begin to build and talk about your life experiences.
Okay, thank you, Ricky. Thank you for all the wonderful work which you and your friends are doing, connecting Sephardic Jewish community, Syrian Jewish community, Russian Jewish community, all of us in one family. And that's the book too. You know, I was born in Donetsk, then it was called Stalin, in Ukraine. Today it is the center of war between Russia and Ukraine. But then it was a very peaceful city to the extent to which it could be peaceful a few years after the Holocaust. And I grew there and lived there without freedom and without identity, knowing that I have no identity, no freedom. What means without identity? There was nothing Jewish in our life, no Jewish book, no place where you can buy such a book, no Jewish language, Hebrew, and no place where you can learn this language, no Jewish religion and no synagogue, no holidays, no tradition, Hanukkah or Pesach, we didn't know such words, no Brit Milah, no Bar Mitzvah. But there was one Jewish thing which existed, and that was anti-Semitism. It is written in the idea of your parents, Jew, and all the conversation at home are about anti-Semitism, about restrictions in your career, there was nothing positive in this word Jewish. There were only restrictions. So the conversation at home usually is that because you're a Jew, you must be the best in physics or mathematics or in chess or something, doesn't matter in what. You must be the best pupil. That is the way of our survival in spite of anti-Semitism. And that was the only value, this physical survival and your career in spite of the restrictions. And also you know that there is no freedom. I always give this episode because simply it shows how at the age of 5, I realize what it is loyal Soviet citizen. Stalin dies and my father explains to me, 5-year-old boy, that it is very good for us, for Jews, that Stalin died because we were all in big danger. There were a lot of persecutions. They didn't know then, of course, details about all the trial of doctors and so on. But he said, it's good. He died. Now it will be better. But he said, don't say to anybody. Do what everybody does. And I go back to kindergarten and I cry together with all the children about death of Stalin. I sing songs about this great son of all the people, Stalin. And I have no idea how many children are really crying or how many are crying exactly like me. That's typical life of Soviet citizen. All the external world is the world of lies, and you never know who really pretends. You think that most everybody pretends living in this world, and the world of truth is only for your family. And that was my childhood, and that continued like this until 1967, when suddenly, because Israel entered our life so powerfully, I discovered my identity.
Fantastic. So one of the things that I struggled with in understanding where it all started was that in a society where there's doublethink is the mindset that's inculcated by the government in everyone and in everything. And I'd like you to spend a minute just explaining that a little bit further. What emerges is the inability to trust anything or anyone. If everyone is concerned with the doublethink and the double speak, then I essentially can't trust anyone. If I can't trust anyone, how do I build a family? How do I build friendships? That's all based on the core value of trust. So Natan, maybe you could speak and give us a description of what doublethink was, how it was inculcated into society, and how you and your family dealt with that type of overarching perspective and was still able to build trusting relationships and trusting family situations.
Yeah, well, that's really very important to understand because doublethink is the base of every totalitarian regime. Totalitarian regime is built on fear. And if in the beginning of this regime, there can be true believers, those who really believe in this new ideology, suddenly communism promises equality and so on. With the time, the more repressive a regime is in order to control its own citizens, the more people are moving from true believers to double thinkers. Those who don't believe in this ideology, but have to play games because if they move further, if they become dissidents, if they start speaking their mind, they will be arrested, their careers will be finished, the careers of their children will be finished, and maybe they will lose also their life. And so that's some kind of self-censorship with which every loyal citizen under dictatorship lives. And here we are under double self-censorship as citizens, but also as Jews. And we know there is anti-Semitism, but we cannot speak about it. We know that we are Jews, but we know nothing positive about it, and we cannot show our curiosity, show our interest. We know there was Holocaust, but there is, I grew a few years after Holocaust, the killing fields of Holocaust. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed in those very places where I grew. And it's as if it doesn't exist. You cannot discuss it, you cannot find a book about it, you cannot have a monument on the place where hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed, and to say a prayer because you don't also know any prayer. And so, but nevertheless, there is a lot of love inside the family, and you have really to be protected, first of all, by the love of the family and trust in one another. And there is a lot of self-support, and there is kind of secret language of oppressed Jews. He's saying, Eden ex nostris, so somehow this phrase was, I don't know what means, is he one of us? And that's, you're saying only by hint, only by wink. And you know, okay, he is one of us. It means that he is as oppressed as we are. It still doesn't mean for you that he shares the same values, that we have unique historical way that we went together, that there is state which unites us. It's still not in our mind. It's only in our mind that this person is suffering exactly as I am. So we are kind of self-supportive system. And also in this situation, people want to know the truth. And where they can get the truth, they can get from the Voice of America, BBC, Call Israel, Voice of Israel, but they are all jammed. And so I remember from my childhood how my father is trying to hear through this jamming, almost with the head inside the radio. But at the same time, it cannot be too loud because the neighbor, we live in communal apartments, the neighbors will hear. And if somebody will inform that you're listening to the Voice of America, you will be punished. Definitely your career will be finished with this. So it's very uncomfortable life. To what extent it's uncomfortable, you will understand only later when you'll suddenly discover that if it's some twist of your mind, if you only would decide it, you can be part of a great history, great people, great country, but that comes later.
So building on that point, and then we're going to have a question for Gil. The title of the book is Never Alone. And you state in the book that once you discovered the possibility of a Jewish identity, of Jewish tradition, of the land of Israel as the land for the Jewish people, from that point, despite the fact that you were chased around by the Soviet Secret Service for several years and imprisoned for 9 years and spent 400 plus days in what you described in the photograph, I can't possibly imagine how a human being could survive that. You say, despite all of that you never felt alone, and thus the title of the book. I have to tell you, we live in a world that couldn't be more different than the world that you spent a good portion of your life in, and you survived and thrived. We have infinitely more than you had, infinitely more. But there are times when we all feel alone. We all do. So I need for you to elaborate a little more on how, despite living the torture from the Secret Service, from the interrogations, the being alone, the year after year, how could you never feel alone? How is that possible?
Well, that is really great revelation or great revolution which happened in my life when 1967, Israel won its enemies, huge humiliation for Soviet Union, a lot of curiosity from people around. But suddenly you see that these people are asking you how you guys did it. They don't ask you maybe you know something about, because you are Jewish, maybe you have relatives, maybe you know. No, they're asking you how you did it. At the beginning, you are afraid. Well, I'm loyal Soviet citizen. What they think that I'm loyal to the other country. But then you realize that if they all connect you to Israel, maybe you should find out more about it. And that's when I started reading the underground, from the books which were brought by American tourists, not only American, Jewish tourists, about myself, about Exodus from Egypt, and all this way through to Exodus of Leon Uris. And suddenly you realize that if you want, if you decide, all this exciting history, it's your history, not the history which begins from 1917, Bolshevik Revolution, all these great series of then great persecutions and killing and exiling and so on. But it starts from Exodus from Egypt, getting to around Har Sinai, and then all the way through to the creation of the state of Israel. And you look, heroes of Leon Uris, and you look at the soldiers near the Kotel Wailing Wall in 1967 and think, my God, they are 20 years old, and I'm 20 years old. So they are making history. They are part of this history. Their life is so interesting. It can be my life. The only thing that you have to say is to say, yeah, that's my life. And here are all these Jewish, not Jewish, Jewish tourists who are coming from New York, from Miami, from Toronto, from Paris, from all the places. And they say, oh, your father is from Odessa. My father is from Odessa. They're all from Odessa. They're all from our shtetl. They're all family. So suddenly, if you only decide, all these people are your family. And most important, and here is the state, which is sending airplanes to the end of the world to bring people. They want to help you. The only thing we have to do is to say that you want this help. So suddenly you understand that it all depends on you, whether you will have your identity, whether you will be part of this history of these people, the country, or you will be continuing this fight for your successful career and physical survival. And then all this gives you strength only for one thing, to say, you know, I don't want to live here. I want to go to Israel. I want to live as a Jew. One phrase which changes all your life, because it's the end of your career, of course, at the beginning of the interrogations and the searches, and many of your friends will ask you to take their telephones from your telephone book because they don't want to be called by KGB for interrogations. But suddenly you start living life of free person, because now you can say exactly what you think. And now you have this unbelievable identity. And another thing, of course, I was very lucky that before I was arrested, for a few years, I was very actively involved, and with time became the spokesman of our Jewish movement. And as the result, I met with many Jews who were coming as tourists, who rediscovered their identity because of they found out that they can be part of the struggle of Jewish people. So their identity became much more active, and I saw their enthusiasm. And I saw I speak about some of these episodes in the book, but when one of the women from Philadelphia I asked her to smuggle one of our documents to American Congress, to Jewish organizations, and then to American Congress. And I saw that she's afraid that her hands are trembling, and because she'll hide it on herself. I said, you know, I'm sorry, don't do it, we'll find another way. She said, no, you don't understand. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for myself. I want to be part of this history. And so when you see this devotion and this enthusiasm, and I became a spokesman, so I was meeting with these people in front of KGB practically every day. So later, when I was arrested, and when KGB was trying to threaten me with the death, and tried to convince me that everybody forgot me, and that the most important thing is your physical survival, and it's all in your hands. Nobody will take care of you. I knew it's a lie. What they want to give me is to take me back to become a Soviet slave, that I belong to different history and to different people, and that these people will never leave me even for one moment. So because I was sure that my wife continued the struggle. I couldn't imagine how successful she is, but I was sure that she continued. But I was also sure the Jewish people are all mobilized and continue their struggle. And that's why the title of the book, Never Alone. The moment you feel yourself part of this history of these people, you know you are never alone.
Spectacular. I have to say, I can't come with a word other than spectacular. And to say that all of us who, thankfully, in the most sense, didn't live through this, have immeasurable lessons to take from it in terms of appreciating that we were somehow dropped into this exclusive, remarkable club called the Jewish people. And that gives us an immeasurable power, not because we have the military strength or we have the financial strength, but because of that eternal strength that we have. And that was something that we all know on some level. But your words and the description in your book, and as you retold it now, just emphasize that point. And in me, I'll tell you personally, gave me a new and heightened sense of appreciation and demand and sense of responsibility for this great gift that I have to be part of the Jewish people. I want to speak to Gil at this point. Gil, you're a Brookings Institute scholar, an author, a professor, and author of several books on very complex and serious subjects. You've authored many, many, many articles. You have an international standing. What brought you to this project? It's a little bit different from what I can tell from the majority of those books you've written. Can you give us a sense of A, what brought you to the project, and B, what your goals are as a result of having this book out there? Can't hear you, Gil.
You are muted, Gil. Gil, you are muted.
Unmute.
There we
Gil,
go.
you need to, there you go. Okay.
I needed permission. So first, let me say what a thrill it is to be with you, and as exciting it is to see over 230 people on the line. I know that in a couple of weeks, we're going to be speaking to many of your young people, many of the students in high school. And when I told Natan about how I bumped into Ricky Novik and we created this relationship, and you as a community were ordering so many books, he didn't care how many books were ordered. What he was excited about was that young people would be reading the book before we started Zooming. Because the whole purpose of this is to start a conversation. And the whole purpose of this is really Medor Lador. And you've done such a beautiful job of framing it today, Ricky, that we're really trying to take some core ideas and turn to the next generation and say, wait a minute, this is an exciting story. You're never alone. And frankly, turn to our generation and say, we did it, but we haven't told that story enough. And that was actually my motivation for getting involved. You know, as you say, I'm a historian. I'm an academic, which means I write alone. I don't play in the sandbox with anybody else. I'm not a very nice person. I'm just busy with my books all the time. And I had just finished this book called The Zionist Ideas. And I thought, who would be the perfect person to write a preface to that book but Natan Sharansky, because he's the world's leading Zionist and has paid such a high price and carries it, as you can see, so easily, so effortlessly for his Zionism. And we had one of these funny meetings in his office. He was the head of the Jewish Agency and of course, very busy. You only have a little bit of time. And I think we're meeting to talk about this preface. Now that I know him, he had gotten the email, decided he would write it and moved on. And he starts talking to me about the need to have a dialogue between Israel and the Jewish people, the need to pass on this message to the next generation. I'm going like, where is this conversation going? And finally, with like 3 minutes left, I said, Natan, are we talking about my book? He said, no. He said, oh, of course I'm gonna write the preface for your book, but I want you to be my co-author. And he was very careful. He said, I don't want you to be my ghostwriter. He said, I really want us to be thought partners on this. And, you know, I was with you, Ricky. In fact, I might recognize you from Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza. We and 100,000 other people bumped into
there you go.
right? And you had people like, you know, Ed Koch and Avital Sharansky and all those people up front. And we were just standing there like citizens, right? In the crowd. So I recognize you twice. One's from Sinai and one's from Solidarity Sunday. And I was a Queens boy, I have to say. So today I'm feeling like an honorary Brooklyn boy. I hope you'll accept me, at least for this hour. So for me, the opportunity to stretch, to really go into a partnership and not just write by myself, and to really take on this tremendous treasure of this story and try to translate it to the next generation was really a tremendous honor, a tremendous privilege. Let's also be honest, if the KGB couldn't say no to Natan Sharansky, I certainly couldn't. And it really was a partnership. We went over every word, every sentence, every phrase, the logic, the structure, and we fought sometimes, we disagreed sometimes, but we never disagreed ideologically. Now think about it. I was born, like most of you, in that vast playground called North America. You started by having Natan explain the mass prison camp that he was born into. And yet we came to a common platform through those Jewish values, through those Jewish ideals, through that sense of never alone. And that's what we try to convey to people, that wherever you are, you're part of this extraordinary people called the Jewish people. And it's really been a tremendous adventure.
Incredible. I have to tell you, the writing style, Gil, is almost poetic. It's just beautiful. The flow is beautiful. The humor is beautiful. The humility, the self-effacing humility is beautiful. And I found that the flow of the book, you know, to keep those kind of core elements, those writing elements consistent through 450 some odd pages, I thought was exceptional. So I applaud the opportunity you have, and I think you executed extremely well.
Well, thank you. It was really a joint achievement. Everything good is him, and every mistake is on me.
Natan, the you taught me something that I didn't understand. Many things. One of those things was the difference in perspective between the refusenik and the dissident. I think that's very, very important. I would love if you could please explain to all of us those different efforts. We know the choices you made at that point in your life. And now looking at those choices that you made to choose your path, how do you look at the whole refusenik dissident perspective? Does it still exist on some level? Was it just for them then at that time? If you would please.
Well, refuseniks were those Jews who wanted to go to Israel, who applied for visa and who were refused. And some of them became very active in demonstrating, in writing appeals and collecting information, becoming activists. And I happened to be a demonstrator and with the time also spokesman of our movement. So, and the number of Jews who wanted to leave was counted in hundreds and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. At the same time, that developed even a little bit earlier, the movement of dissidents, those who disagree with Soviet regime and finally are ready to speak against this regime. And there were different people. There was Andrei Sakharov, the great scientist, number one of the Soviet Union, who one day published a letter to the leader saying that without freedom of word, we will not have a modern science and become a dissident. And there was Solzhenitsyn, a great writer who was in Gulag and then wrote a book and showed the world what is Soviet system about. And these are people who wanted to change the system, to change Soviet Union, not simply to leave Soviet Union. And there was some position of many leading Zionists, and especially those who were in Israel trying to help us, that we Jews should not be connected to this. We should not irritate KGB too much. And one thing is when you want to leave, maybe there will be some compromise reached. And the other thing, when you're also helping to those who want to change that system. And I didn't accept it. Well, not that I didn't want to leave, and I was not going to spend my life on changing the Soviet Union. But I was, as a free person, now that I speak the truth, I cannot hide the fact that I'm sympathetic to these people. And also I believe that in the end, it's good for our Zionist struggle, that there'll be, that people who are involved in the general struggle for freedom also will be friendly, will be connected. And really, the fact that I was very friendly with Sakharov, no doubt, helped to mobilize him on the support and to attract a lot of broader non-Jewish attention to our struggle. So that was my conflict, and sometimes very tough conflict with some of the Zionists. But on the other hand, there were some This is what we're saying. You have to choose. Are you for universal values or you're only for Jewish values? So choose. So this pressure from two sides, that as if I have to choose, I thought was absolutely wrong. That if I have strength to fight for my Jewish values, for the interests of my people, it's only because I became a free person. So for me, freedom and Zionism were connected very naturally. And then, as you can see in the book, I took it through all my life, believing that we have to fight for national interests and for liberal values at the same time.
Beautiful. Now, in our day, we have this concept. There are a handful of names for it, but moral relativism is one of the terms that's used today that says that my morality and your morality are all the same. Your morality, my morality might come from the Bible. Your morality might come from an idea of this moment or this decade. But today, there's a very strong movement on the planet that any morality is an accepted morality, and therefore nothing trumps anything else. And I struggled with this as I read your book, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And that is, if this was going on today, in today's world, where anything can be explained away, communism is not necessarily bad. A terrorist is not necessarily a terrorist because they have a cause and they have an urgency about them. Would this movement to get the Jews out of the former Soviet Union, would it have taken root and would it have been effective?
Yes, well, maybe one of the most upsetting things today is that some terrorists, some extremists can receive legitimacy through theories of intellectual people, academia people, who speak about that all the cultures have the same value. And that's why if there is a society like ours, which is built on the values of human rights, of the individual freedom, there are other cultures who are built on different principles, and we have to respect all of them. Right. And the more, or this dream that in order to overcome the wars, in order to live in peace, we must have no strong values for which we have to fight for. As John Lennon wrote in his Imagine, which became like symbol of generations. Imagine how good it will be the world where there is no borders, no nations, no religions, no God, and the world where there is nothing to die for. And then what I'm saying is there is nothing to die for, there is nothing to live for. And the world which gives away its moral values, it becomes decadent, shallow. If you don't have identity, you don't have historical depth, you don't have passion, desire that your children will live in such and such a world, your life is shallow and you never have strength to fight for any real values. As a result, this free world, which tries to say that all the cultures are equal, doesn't have any strength to defend its own culture from the terrorists. So yes, I believe that the readiness of people to fight for the freedom of the world is based in their identity, in their desire that to belong to something, in their belief that there are things which are more important than your physical survival. And that's why it's so frightening sometimes to see.
So in fact, if circumstances were different and your experiences and the former Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union, in this day and age, things might not have gone the way they went.
I would say more. If Western leaders at some moment didn't accept that we are real allies and not the leaders of the Soviet Union, if President Reagan didn't say clearly, Soviet Union is an evil empire, and we cannot accept their moral. We cannot make compromises on our principles. If the Western leaders didn't come to this conclusion, maybe Soviet Union would exist until this day, and hundreds of millions of people were still enslaved by communists.
If I could interject here, I think there are two very important historical points. One is, you're right, there is this challenge today of moral relativism. We use the phrase postmodernism because it's more complicated than that. It's not only this imagined world of supposedly I want to be a citizen of the world and universalist, but they've also taken the Marxist idea and said there are certain identities, because here they hijack identity and turn it into identity politics. And they've said certain identities are kosher. So on campus, we hear people say, oh, Jews, why are you being Jewish nationalists? Why are you being Zionists? That's so narrow. And yet Palestinian nationalism is holy. We're told that we can fragment identity on campus if it's African-American identity. And I don't want to disrespect that. Or if it's a gay identity, I don't want to disrespect that. Or a women's identity, I don't want to disrespect that. But why is our identity not respected? And why do so many of our kids kind of drink that ideological Kool-Aid? Why do they come singing the song of Imagine and not the song of Hatikva? Why do they buy into that notion? And it's because they feel guilted into it, because their identity has not been respected. And one of the things we need to do, and one of the things I really honor about what you guys in your community are doing, is I call this Pilates. You're strengthening the core before they go out into the world. And so that's the first step. And the second thing is we have to also point out that, as you well know, it took a while for the movement for Soviet Jewry even back then to gain momentum. And when Natan talks about the evil empire speech, which he heard about in the Gulag, and they passed words about it through their toilet telephones, from prisoner to prisoner, how there's a president who's talking about the evil empire. I was in an alternate universe. I was at Harvard University, and we were told, we were graduate students in history, the dean of historians at that time, Henry Steele Commager, called that speech, that very speech, the worst speech that an American president had ever given, because he was saber rattling, because he was making trouble, because he was threatening the Soviet Union, and that's what would make it aggressive. And it's absurd. So one of the things we have to realize is that there was tremendous power back then too, from the far left saying, no, 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 the Soviet Union is our friends. Look, equality, Marxism, socialism, a vision for us all. And we, and as Jews, we were more sensitive. We could tell stories of Ida Nudel and Natan Sharansky. We had names of people who were suffering in that prison camp, which some people called paradise. And that helped us. And fortunately, we had people like Ronald Reagan from the Republican Party, Henry Jackson and Daniel Patrick Moynihan from the Democratic Party, who didn't care about party. They didn't care about partisanship. They said, this is wrong. And they united partially because they'd all experienced in World War II. They had seen what happens when you let totalitarianism reign. And so that's why we today have to also be very, very careful not to let totalitarianism reign from the far left or the far right.
Excellent. So in fact, with the way that this question was responded to, we've leapfrogged Natan's leadership here in the state of Israel in 4 governments. But I want to go back to that in a minute. But before we do, I want to just touch on what was actually the last important part of the book, which is Natan's work both in the Israeli government and in the Jewish Agency, reaching out to the communities in North America and in Europe. Maybe, Natan, you can tell us the results of some of those efforts and ongoing where you see things developing.
Well, we speak a lot about the tensions between Israel and world Jewry. And each time when speaking about one another conflict, we give a strong point from one side, we immediately try to explain what was in the head of the other side. Because really that is my experience of looking on dialogue between Israel and Jewish people from 3 different perspectives, from prison, then from the chair of Israeli government towards diaspora, and then from the chair of Jewish agency towards diaspora. I say that what really unites us, it's our desire to continue our journey together. And we always have to remind ourselves, because it is so easy to accuse the other side. Israel government very often feels these Jews don't understand us. They love Israel, which exists in their imagination, but not the real Israel, which has to fight every day against the enemies. On the other hand, when Jewish communities say, well, these guys don't understand us, they don't understand that we want, together with our prayers, with our Judaism, to be near the Kotel exactly like all the rest. And in fact, all these disagreements, like disagreements between Jewish organizations in the times of Soviet struggle, are nothing in comparison with our desire to be together. And then comes really alarming thing that suddenly I go to American campuses, and I visited more than 100 American campuses, and they see there, suddenly, well, because of this strong anti-Israeli campaign, suddenly some young Jews, for the first time I saw it in 2003, young Jews say that they would like to express their support of Israel, but because their professors, that their career depends on their professors, will not like it, they prefer to sit and wait for a few years. And I thought first time, my God, it's not in Moscow University, in Harvard where I hear it. It's in the center of the free thought. And that was the first time when I really became very alarmed by the fact that this almost communist phenomenon of doublethink can be developed, can be among us. It can divide between Israel and Jewish people. And that's what needs a lot of work. And that's why I spent many years trying to make a connection between old anti-Semitism, hatred toward Jewish people, and new anti-Semitism, hatred towards Jewish state. And I'm glad that today there is finally international definition, which includes all those principles that I was promoting about demonization, against demonization of Israel, double standard. But it's surprising to see that even some Jews are not ready to accept these definitions because they're afraid that they will be suspected, that because of their Zionism, they'll be suspected that they're bad American patriots.
So Natan, where is this going? Where is this going? This was a very important, a substantial part of your book. And you've dedicated the last 9 years in particular, you're doing some very important work now, and a lot of your time in government was dedicated to this. We're parents, we're educators in our communities. We want to hear your insight on this. How do we make our children stronger? How do we make our students stronger? How do we make our institutions stronger? Where is this all going, in your opinion?
We are now in the stage when we need one another. World Jewry discovered, it's American Jews who discovered that in order their grandchildren will be Jewish, their children have to be connected to Israel. That's how birthright was born, and I was involved in this, and I speak a lot about it. The fact that today there are hundreds of thousands of young Jews who visited Israel, even with a short period of time, changes all the dialogue, changes all the station. And I spent a lot of time developing Masa programs, meaning that in Jewish institute, encouraging young Jews to come for 1 year, for 6 months, for 3 months, of different sizes. We are ready to invent special program for every young Jew. You want to be a chef, you want to be a dancer, you want to be a philosopher, we'll find programs for you. Only spend some essential time in Israel. And the parents have to understand it's not for us, it's not for Israel, it's not for security of Israel, it's for strengthening our family, the Jewish people. On the other hand, yes, Israelis have to learn more in their schools about Jews of diaspora. We need mutual course of Jewish civilization, which is learned in Flatbush Yeshiva and in academic gymnasia in Jerusalem. It's impossible that we are one people, and it's natural that some of us are more religious, some of us are more secular, some of us left and right. But the fact that we don't have common cause of our history, of our values, or that's wrong. The dialogue, the idea is to have as much of dialogue as possible between Israelis and Jews of America, and the best thing for this dialogue is Israel itself.
There's also a trap here we have to avoid, if I may, that we have to be careful not to just be anti-Semites. and not just anti-Zionists. We talk about the 3Ds. We talk about the structure you have to use to fight anti-Semitism, to fight anti-Zionism. But if it's only defensive, we let the enemy set the agenda. And that's why, if you listen to so much of this, of Natan's emphasis, it's on identity. That's a positive. We don't let the anti-Semite make the Jew makes the Jew. And that was Herzl's vision, and that was our rabbi's vision, and that's the Zionist vision. And so we really have to talk about what are the core things we get from being part of this people? What are the core things we get from being part of this history? And in a world where we see so many people feeling so alone, so alienated, so lost, so broken, coming to universities, they finally got into the big fancy university and they go straight to the psychologist's office because they have no core. We have a core and we have a message that we can give them. So it's not just for the sake of the Jewish people, it's also for the sake of every one of our students and every one of our people to stretch their souls and fill their souls up with meaning, because ultimately that's what we're looking for as human beings. We don't just want to make money. We want to make a difference. We want to have a sense of purpose. And Judaism is a framework for finding that.
Beautiful. Well, we have many more questions. I have many more questions on my list. And people in our audience have a number of questions as well. I want to frame this, if we can, as to create a bookend to where we started, as we do in the educational platform, as a beginning of learning together and growing together and enjoying all of the insights that the two of you have to offer. I want to ask one last quick question. So point being that I hope this will be the first and not the last, and that we'll have other opportunities for our community to join with the two of you collectively and individually to continue to learn from you and to grow from your insights and life experiences. Before we open up the floor to a few questions from the attendees, Natan, I want to ask you one other question that you may not be able to answer, but I hope you can. Your young wife leaves you after a day of marriage and comes to the state of Israel, connects to Mossad Rav Kook himself, and a handful of other people, and becomes this global diplomat on your behalf. Where did her strength come from? We need to hear that. I need to understand that. Her voice ended up being a universal voice and had unparalleled strength in bringing about what we're celebrating and learning about today. Can you tell us a little bit about where her strength came from?
Well, thank you for this question. I'm always excited when I speak about it. But first of all, it's not that she left me one day after our chuppah to Israel. I sent her one day after our chuppah to Israel because I felt I'm already refusing. And she's such a nice tender flower from the East, somehow found in Moscow. She doesn't belong here. And I hope that she'll start building our house and in a few months I'll join her. And then really when I took her to the airport next next morning after our chuppah, I said to her, I'm sure in 6 months I'll be in Jerusalem, so start preparing home. I said her 12 years later, and she was already not a shy girl. She was the leader of the hundreds of thousands of demonstrations. There was not a public leader or the head of the state who didn't become one of her soldiers. And still she was speaking that very quiet, shy voice. And the moment I came, she said, okay, that's it. I don't need to no more, you'll be outspoken. And you couldn't say that she was forcing herself to go public. What made her, in addition to, of course, our love story, but she was lucky that very quickly she met people. She had many questions. And the more she was learning about the history, she had a question, why she is so lucky? Yehuda Halevi, that she learned about him and his poetry in Ulpan, couldn't make it. And why she did it? And then really the pupils of Rav Kook, one of the pupils, Hannah Tao, the Chanal Bracha, she told her, she opened her books and she said, there is Tachnit Elokit, the design, the plan of Kadosh Baruch Hu, which who is going to bring all the Jews together. She said, and I'm in the Tochnit? She said, yes. And Natan is there? Yes. And that's why it will happen. So, of course, it looks like very naive, but the idea that we are becoming not only part of this history, but part of some grand design which goes through 1,000 years really gave you a lot of strength. And when the moment I was arrested, and so many politicians, specialists in Soviet Union, were saying, wait, we have to check, who knows, maybe quiet diplomacy will help. Rav Kook said immediately, if one Jew is accused Soviet Union in being a spy, all the millions of Soviet Jews are in danger. Look at the history. Immediately, all the books go to fight. And this feeling of Avital, which Rav Kook personally gave you, that she's fighting not only for me, but she's fighting for millions of Soviet Jews. That it so happened that God gave her this important tafkid, role. I think gave her, of course, a lot of strength, in addition to the fact that, of course, we loved one another.
Fantastic, fantastic. Irene, do you want to give a few questions from our group? Or
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions that came in the chat. Here's a question from Miriam Carey. She said, at one point, you said that you felt more sorry for your jail guards than you did for yourself. Could you explain why that was and what you meant by that?
I can't say that I was sorry, but simply I saw the poor guys. Not only said, I told them, they're slaves and I'm free. And I had many ways to show it. I was telling them anti-Soviet jokes against Soviet leaders. There were a lot of very funny jokes, but they were underground jokes. And here I'm telling them it, and it's funny, I'm laughing. They're exploding from laughter, but they cannot laugh. They have to express their anger, to shout. But I say, you see, you can't even laugh when you want to laugh. And you want to say to me that I'm in prison, you're in prison. And that's really true, that loyal Soviet citizens, they were in prison. I was a free person, and I was sure that all my people are with me.
From Rabbi Eitan Tokayer, he wants to know, when you first arrived in Israel, what was one thing that exceeded your expectations about the country, and was there something that disappointed you when you first arrived?
Well, first of all, I found myself straight from hell. In the morning, I was in the Soviet prison, in the paradise in Israel. And now that I'm going down from the skies in which I found myself for 33 years, I'm still in paradise. So it was much more colorful, much more passionate than in all my dreams in the prison. So it's very passionate and colorful family. Now the fact that almost immediately I could face some internal fightings between some religious and secular and so on, debates whether I will put on kippah or my wife will take off her kisui rosh, or we shall divorce because two different people cannot live under one home. It looked very absolutely ridiculous. But with the time, of course, you know more and more about the challenges which we as Jewish people have to stay in one family.
So there are a few questions with the same theme. A lot of people worried about the young people going to college and wondering if our community and our views of Israel are not enough to prepare them, if maybe we should be sending them off with a less glamorous facts, as someone said. Do you think that?
Well, yeah, I want Gil to take this question. Yeah.
Go ahead, Gil.
Look, I think we do sometimes fall into the mistake of overly romanticizing Israel and teaching in Israel in Jewish day schools that's just Israel of blue and white flowers and Hatikva and Hava Nagila. And then they come to university and they feel lied to. And I'd rather have a resilient, multidimensional education. Look, I'm not afraid of the complexity. I'm not afraid of the messes because I know ultimately we have truth on our side. Ultimately, we're the democratic ones, lowercase d. I'm not getting into a political party. Right? We're the ones who have the world's only democracy in the Middle East. We're the ones who've tried to have peace again and again. Do we make mistakes? What country doesn't? But why is it that I'm speaking, let's say, at Harvard University a couple of months ago, and a young Jewish woman calls herself an Israel critic? It's fascinating. She was clearly anti-Trump, but she didn't call herself an America critic, right? There's this identity, there's this need to kind of to prove your chops. And I've had students tell me, I wanted to join the feminist movement, but they told me you have to bash Israel first. I wanted to show my support for Black Lives Matter. They have to bash Israel first. So there is also a kind of prejudice that we have to prepare our students for. But the most effective education is honest education. So that's the first thing I would say, that the more we teach pride, the more we teach depth, but also complexity in the Jewish day schools. I always say when I meet, and I've done this at APAC and I've done this in Jewish day schools, I say, ask me the tough questions. Because if you don't ask the tough questions right here around the table, it's not like they're not going to be asked, but they'll be asked by some professor who isn't going to give the complexity, but is going to give the anti-Israel bash. So I'd rather have them coming in with a more multidimensional, a more naughty understanding of Israel and of Zionism and of the Jewish people, because all countries have complexities, and there's a difference between Zionism, which is the movement of Jewish peoplehood, saying we are a people, not just a religion. We have ties to a land, and we have the rights to establish a homeland on that state, on that land, a state on that homeland, like 192 other countries in the United Nations, versus Israel, which is a country that sometimes makes mistakes. And when people say, I'm anti-Zionist, I say, what are you saying? That we don't have the right to a land? That you're deciding that we're not a people? How dare you define me? So I think we also have to teach our students complexity, but also how to push back a little bit in a way that's thoughtful and substantive.
So well said. I think
Wonderful. I think we're going to wrap. I want to just add one quick thing. There were two other people who had a great level of self-sacrifice in our community in Brooklyn, Jack Dweck and Harry Ashkenazi, who also traveled to the former Soviet Union with books, with tefillin, with letters, with whatever they could bring other than their own presence to bring chizuk to the great heroes of that day. We have a beautiful custom in Judaism. We know we never say goodbye. We know when parting from one another, we part with a halacha, meaning that the conversation isn't ending, the conversation has just started. And as we walk away pondering that halachic point that may have been mentioned when leaving, it means we're still thinking about the conversation that happened and still thinking about the future conversations that will happen. So I want to say goodbye to all of you, and particularly to our special guests, two men, giants, each of them in his own right, who have had an immeasurable impact on the Jewish people. Yahid v'Rabim, halachak Rabim. We should meet again. We should continue learning from each other and growing together. Again, I want to thank those outstanding organizations in our community and their leadership for bringing us all together. And may we continue to celebrate. Maybe we celebrate. Natan, you mentioned that you had your bar mitzvah recently, which means you're just getting warmed up. And inshallah, with God's help, you'll continue to bless the Jewish people and the world in general with your courage and your insight and your creativity. Gil, you're just getting warmed up as well. And we look forward to greeting you in our community and learning from you and growing from you.
Amen.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
L'Shana Hazot B'Yerushalayim. Thank you.
Shana haba b'shalayim abnuya. Thank you all.
Amen. Thank you.
Bye-bye.